You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to Barbell Logic, Eastover Burden. I'm Nikki Sims, the Chief Experience Officer over at Barbell Logic, and I am an exclusive coach. I get to coach special people. And with me is Andrew Jackson. He's our Chief Operations Officer, COO. Just missing the letter L at the end. You are very cool. You put the COO in cool.
Oh
also
my
an
gosh.
exclusive coach.
What an honor. Why, thank you. How's things going?
Oh, things are really good. So we've been having a blasty. Shortly after I moved here to Southern California, I got myself an e-bike because I needed to be able to get to the beach in the easiest way possible. That was really important for me to invest in that. And for me, that means not having to worry about parking, not having to break a sweat on the hill that I have to deal with, and being able to schlep all my stuff with me. So I got an e-bike some years ago, and recently you have discovered this joy.
I did. Yes. I think I rented one for the first time a summer ago or two, and finally decided to invest as well. And it's awesome.
It's so fun.
I've been a cyclist most of my life. I bike commuted for many, many years, but haven't ridden a bike consistently for the last, 4 or 5 years. It's a lot of fun to get out there and not have to pedal harder, but still be able to go faster.
Yeah. You get to zoom around, you get the breeze. When you need to get out of the way of a car or move quickly, you got the power. So it's fun. I feel like we're just like little kids having summer.
Yeah.
Riding to the beach, riding around.
How's training going?
Training's been good. It's been really fun. I know I've talked a bit about doing a bit of really focused hypertrophy work, really not doing any heavy barbell work at all right now. And recently I added calories, and that's been really fun. Interestingly, I think it's actually just been making me hungrier. So I've weighed like 165, 167 for years and years. And so when you're adding muscle, you also are choosing to add weight. And that is what I want, and also a scary thing in some ways. So adding calories has felt wonderful. Like training has felt amazing. And I've only added like 200, 300 calories a day. So I guess not a huge amount, but I feel the difference, and it makes it feel so much fun. Like I've been doing leg presses for 6 weeks in a row. And since adding calories in a couple weeks ago, just like felt so much better. It's amazing how much of a difference it makes.
So you actually weighing and measuring, macro counting kind of nutrition right now?
Yeah, which I had given up for a long time because that just, sometimes it gets really annoying when you're not wanting to do it, especially if you're really restricted. You're looking at your phone all the time. But to me, I really like it because now I get to make sure that I'm eating enough without, going too much. I don't want to eat 2,700 calories in like the big realm of want, in the moment. Of course I do, because I love food. But now I know that I'm aiming for 2,100. I'm aiming for 145 grams of protein, and I know that I'm getting enough without getting too much. So it's actually worked out pretty well, especially because I eat the same thing every day. But yeah, it's been kind of fun. I'm enjoying it. I think it's going where I want it to go, which is like my back, shoulders, and butt. So that's fun. And it feels really good.
I don't track consistently, but I do think it's useful to do an audit every once in a while, just track for 2-3 weeks, as well as monitoring your weight and waist and what you're actually eating. Because even if I've, having been doing this for years and years, there's a bit of a drift that occurs that extra portions kind of creep on from some foods that I prefer. And sometimes the protein starts drifting down.
A new kind of cheese. And you're like, I want this cheese all over everything.
Yeah. Especially with Clara, my daughter's a cheese nut and constantly wants to be getting these new types of brie, and we've always got good cheese laying around. So yeah, that is always a danger zone.
Yeah. When's the last time you've done an audit on your calories?
Honestly, it's been probably about a year since I tracked. I have a structure that I've actually been working with since Jillian was my coach. It'll be 4 years ago this November, which is wild to think about.
Yeah.
But I had always done macro counting. In fact, the first time I ever counted macros was on a Excel spreadsheet that I built from scratch in 1998 and had to go research all of the macros and the calories and I had my own, this is well before MyFitnessPal, so I had my own database of all the foods that I was eating. And anyways, I've been macro tracking to some degree off and on for over 20 years. And Jillian was the first one that we'd started out actually using macros. And then she kind of evolved our plan to have more of a sort of a framework, what each meal would roughly look like. And it started out kind of weighing and measuring. And then towards the end, I was, just kind of eating intuitively. And I've been doing that for probably the last 3 years. And
what were your goals when you were eating like that?
At the time, I had been hovering around 260 to 275 for probably 5 years. And my goal was to recomposition. So at that point in time, I was kind of trying to lose body fat while still being able to train hard. So I was lifting 4 days a week, and it teed up a year of the best lifts. All of my lifetime PRs were during that year of actually recomposition. So I lost weight, probably about 25 pounds, and still hit all those PRs. So squat, bench, press, and deadlift all PR'd while in the process of losing weight.
You pulled 600.
Yep.
Was that your 505 squat?
505 squats, 407
407.
bench. Weird numbers because it's all kilos. So it was a 185 kilo bench, 230 kilo squat. Deadlift was 600 because it was at Matt's house in pounds.
Yeah.
And then I did a 121 kilo overhead press, which is about 266, I think, something like that. 265.
And that's amazing because when I first met you, this was it like 10 years ago now? A long time ago. That was in your, what we will lovingly call the Milky Boy phase.
That was the Milky Boy. Yeah.
Milky Boy. And you weighed a bit more.
Yeah.
Less facial hair.
Yeah. I was probably mid 270s at that point. Real close to my heaviest was at 285. I, at the time, was not drinking a gallon of milk a day, but getting up to that point, to that weight, I had been. I think I actually drank a gallon of milk a day for well over 6 months straight.
Oh my gosh.
Which, in hindsight, I would not recommend or do again.
And that's what a lot of us bought into. Like, it was the let's gain weight so we can get weight on the bar. And did that work for you? Or how did it work for you?
From my perspective, I had grown up and spent most of my life thinking I was too big and was always restricting. The reason I was counting calories in the 90s was because I convinced myself as a 6'1", 210-pound collegiate athlete, I was a rower, that I needed to lose weight. I, was convinced that my coach thought I needed to be lighter. So I, even training 6 days a week, sometimes multiple times a day, added in running and was restricting to somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 calories a day, which is...
Oh my Lord. That's nuts.
Not enough. And unsurprisingly, my performance suffered. But I had always just sort of had this image in my mind of what I needed to look like. And I've always kind of described it as Brad Pitt in Fight Club, which, growing up in the 90s, that was just sort of like this idealized image of what I thought what a guy was supposed to look like. That kind of... Having now been doing strength training for years, I recognize that he was probably incredibly weak and, malnourished. But growing up in the 90s and that kind of skinny alternative, Kurt Cobain kind of look was something that I had always kind of associated with wanting to look like. And I was not that. I could remember thinking I was overweight or fat, as early as like 6th grade.
Oh, wow.
school picture, and my nickname in high school was Fatty.
Nice. That's really nice.
Mostly because it was somewhat tongue in cheek, but I was on the cross country team. And so we all gave each other nicknames. One guy was Tiny, there was a Skinny, there was a Hairy, and I was Fatty.
Wow. I wonder how all these people are doing today.
Because at 172 pounds, on a high school cross country team, that was the big guy.
Yeah.
But anyways, long story short, getting back to when I decided to invest, if you will, into gaining weight and eating in a caloric surplus, it was like this radical, game-changing experience where for the first time in my life, I was intentionally eating far in excess of what I needed. And I remember feeling like I could feel the calories washing over my body, and kind of like what you're describing, like all of a sudden weights that were difficult. I had been stuck trying to squat 100 kilos for 3x5 for a year. And then I started making progress again. So
that's cool. That must have felt so freaking good.
In the moment, it felt really amazing. And I rationalized it based on wanting to be stronger. And it kind of gave myself permission to indulge in that excess. But it came with a price. Because, having for most of my life had that body image of being too big, then I kind of switched into not recognizing that I was rapidly putting on body weight that was not conducive to improving my strength or my health, and got all the way up to 285.
Yeah, 285. So that was your peak weight?
Yeah, 285. I remember stepping on a scale right around Christmas and had kind of caught off guard by that number on the scale.
More than 100 pounds heavier than you were when people were calling you fatty.
Yeah, and where I had come off of right before starting that weight gain, I had been doing Paleo Zone and CrossFit 6, 7, sometimes 8 times a week. And I was at 195. And then over the course of a weekend, switched to gallon of milk a day and gaining all this weight and prioritizing strength. I wasn't doing GOMAD for 2.5 years, but over the course of 2.5 years of just essentially unlimited eating, found myself at 285, and it was not comfortable.
What did it feel like?
Like breathing hard, going upstairs. I remember that being a thing. Just moving in general, day-to-day life was not comfortable.
This is when your knees were hurting a lot?
I had a knee issue. I don't know that it was directly related to the body weight, but I do wonder if just general kind of inflammation due to food was an issue. And interesting that I think as I look back at it, both during the underfed and the overfed phase, the common thread is that I wasn't paying attention to how I felt. And I was caught up in these external feedback or perceptions that used to override how I was feeling in the moment. When I was underfed, I felt weak, depleted, frail, and yet kind of driven by wanting to look a certain way or see a certain number on the scale. On the other end.
And that's usually when people give you the most compliments, is when you're at your skinniest.
Right. Yeah. Certainly was getting a lot of feedback, comments. People notice that you lose weight. I think people feel more comfortable commenting on it when you lose weight, because that's generally accepted as like a positive thing that usually most people, have to do intentionally.
Yeah.
I look at pictures from that era and it looks not what I remember thinking. At the time I thought I looked fit, and I now in hindsight look sick.
Oh, wow.
From my perspective, And then on the flip side, when I was overeating, I think I was caught up in thinking that weight on the bar going up all the time was the indicator of success, and ignoring the fact that my digestion was completely wrecked and felt uncomfortable.
No bidets at that time.
I needed one for sure. And I think that's the biggest thing that changed with working with Jillian is that, and I think what most of our nutrition coaches prioritize now is eating a balanced range of whole foods and aligning your energy intake with what your training needs, and using some of those external factors as certainly input, like weight on the scale, waist, weight on the bar, performance in the gym, but not to be prioritized over kind of the overall health and well-being, day-to-day sort of well-being. I use that as more of an indicator, I think, of whether my nutritional intake is aligned with my training.
I'm curious still, like, how do you know if you're now getting enough or if you're getting too much? What do you use for feedback?
Well, I do still track my weight and waist on a fairly regular basis, and just visually, I think that was another thing that Jillian encouraged, was just sort of like keeping an eye on visually how things are changing and just noticing. But it's more trend based, I would say. Like, the absolute weight on the scale is not as much of an indicator as kind of whether it's going up or down. And I think I balance that with, or triangulate it maybe a little bit more with what my waist measurement is and how I look visually. There are some days where I'm lighter, but my waist has gone up, and I just kind of have this more fluffy look in the mirror. And so that's not necessarily a good thing that I'm lighter when it's visually not leaning out. Whereas other times I'll be heavier, but my waist is down and visually looks leaner. And so I think it's just maybe more data points and how my training is doing. I'll notice that if I'm not getting enough calories, the weight just feels totally different in my hands or on my back.
Yeah. And there are less like aches and pains,
Totally,
I think,
yes.
and less likely to get hurt. Like when I went through my back stuff, like we've talked about, I was doing jiu-jitsu 5 times a week, really hard classes, rolling with big people. And I was lifting really, really heavy 3 or 4 times a week. And that's when I was hearing the most, like, you are lean and shredded right now. And I was a lot lighter. And that's when like a lot of the injuries started to happen. As I look back now, like I was not feeding enough, not getting enough calories to sustain what I was trying to do.
And how is it for you in that respect, as you're gaining weight intentionally, adding calories intentionally, and your body's changing? How are you handling that perspective, that perception?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot, how it's like a body image and also performance, like state of mind, state of being. It's really multifaceted. In my head, I'm imagining like one of those Rubik's cubes, but it's not a cube. It's like a different shape, tetrahedron. I don't know, some word that you probably know, where there are so many different things to feel about it, where it's in like all the emotional side of it. Like, do I get to have what I want to have when I want to have it? And what if what I want to have right now is ice cream? How does that fit? And what is that going to do to me? And then, what feedback am I getting from people, when I like post on Instagram, or the feedback that I get when I wear certain pieces of clothing and how I feel in it and what it like pinches and doesn't pinch, and, and then how is that translating to weight on the scale? You can be feeling so wonderful and just so stoked about your body. And then you get on the scale and there's this number that you've decided at some point is too much. And now you feel bad about everything. And then the performance aspect of like, well, it feels really good to eat and feel good in the gym. And is that worth, how I'm feeling in certain pieces of clothing? And so and like you said, it has to be really trend based, because it's not just like stationary tetrahedron or whatever, like at one moment in time. Like, you have to collect more data over time. And like for women, like the month changes where you're heavier one set of days and lighter another set of day. And for some reason, we just only remember the set of days where we're lighter and really leaner. Forget about the other part of the month where our boobs are bigger and wonderful. Like, just see ourselves as like fluffy and sad during certain phases. And so the more time, I think, the more I'm starting to appreciate how important it is to not just focus on one of those sides, not just the scale weight that day, not just I get to eat a bunch of ice cream today. Like, how are you moving through space and seeing everything. So yeah, that's been an important exercise, like seeing like the need to get different size clothes and seeing like weights on the scale that at one point I decided was too much. Remembering to step back and see all of my life and all of the trend and how that's feeling.
I noticed the weight on the scale as a common challenge for my clients that have certain numbers in their head just associated with certain things. And, being at a certain point in their life, in their past, they weighed a certain amount, and that was associated with
good.
Usually it's a heavier weight that they didn't like. And then when I work with them, sometimes for years and years, and they've put on muscle mass and they hit that same number, they look in the mirror and they're like, well, I don't look like what I remember that looking like. And I don't feel like I remember that, feeling, but I don't like being at this number because there's so many negative emotions.
Yes.
Like you said, that come up. You can't control the emotion. Like it just comes up. And then you have to decide, what am I going to do with this? And that I think is kind of that's the crux of it, is how do you move forward with those emotions that come up when you either step on the scale, look in the mirror, tape your waist or what have you, and choose whether or not to change your training. That I think is really what becomes interesting, is
and your eating
or your nutrition, right? As you continue to change, do you have, as part of that Rubik's Cube or whatever shape of variables, is there some guideposts that you use that you're looking for to make decisions about whether your training is going the direction you want? How do you evaluate that over time?
It's a good question. And like at this point, I'm not chasing numbers. So it's not available for me to say, well, when I hit, this number on a lift, then I'll know like things are going in the right direction. It's like really aesthetic based.
Yeah.
So my ability to complete my workouts, which are super high volume. So that's one, being able to complete my workouts. And I look for trends of being able to go a little bit heavier since I am repeating exercises. So my ability to kind of MED in that way, it'll be like tape measure for hips and waist, and also knowing that my waist might go up a little bit, which is kind of a tough one because I have a very short waist. Like my ribs and hip bones are basically touching. So like when I am really sensitive to my waist looking like it's getting wider. So that one's like kind of a touchy spot for me, but that's, it's where I hold some weight. So the guideposts are, am I comfortable enough in my body where like my waist isn't getting proportionally bigger than my hips? Like if my butt and hips are growing and my waist is growing bigger, that would make me a little uncomfortable. And I would have to kind of check in again and see if this is where I want to be going. And if it's time to not eat that same amount of calories, that would be a big one for me, I think.
I'm the same. I think waist over time has become more of the reliable goalpost as an indicator of where things are at. And I also like that it fluctuates less frequently.
Yeah.
It's more consistent. And the day-to-day weight changes are all over the place, especially at, now I'm typically somewhere between 240 and 250. I can, even throughout the course of a day, weigh 8 pounds more, depending on how much salt and water I'm consuming. So yeah, definitely like to rely on waist. And I really like what you said there. And I think it's an extremely important thing that, again, I picked up over the course of working with Jillian and also just training and working on nutrition in general, is that it's something that I can manage. And if the number starts going up, I know what dials or levers to pull to change it. And that's been, I think, the most powerful change over the course of my life, that I used to feel like I needed to white knuckle or, blow the doors out, depending on when I was in the Milky Boy phase. Like I didn't know how to be patient and adjust the variables gradually so that I could either increase or decrease whatever variable it is that I wanted. And That's, I think, the thing that is empowering, for lack of a better word, at this point, is that, and if I could do it all again, and what I try to work with my clients to do now is whichever way you want to go, minimum effective dose, let's pick a direction and work towards it incrementally so that the changes don't have to be super drastic. You don't have to white knuckle it. You can incrementally make your way in that direction and evaluate as you go and start to allow yourself time to either grow into that new size or, make sure you're not completely starving and draining yourself if you're cutting, and course correct as you go. I think that's really the biggest difference that I have in terms of my mental model.
And it has to be done over time. The only thing that I believe in that is a kind of what I'll call a quick fix is eliminating booze. For me, eliminating added sugars, eliminating anything processed. When I eliminate that stuff from my diet, I feel so much better in 4 to 9 days.
Right.
And sometimes if I just make that change for a short amount of time, I'm just like, okay, I'm fine. I was actually bloated.
Right.
And now I'm feeling, back to normal, and I don't feel like I have to, go on some crazy cut or have one of those knee-jerk reactions. So I find going through that series of days is useful to kind of get clear on how you actually feel when you have hydration and no food that make you feel bloated and puffy and under-recovered and are compromising sleep.
Right.
Then I think it's helpful to assess okay, do I need to add calories? Do I need to take out calories over a longer amount of time?
That's one of the biggest challenges, I think, with the nutrition coaching aspect of the day-to-day job is that with strength training, you get something that you can work on for a session and give 24-hour feedback. With nutrition coaching, there's some expectation level setting that this is going to take months and adjustments that you're doing gradually. Your adjustment was 200 calories?
It's 200 or 300 calories. Yeah.
Yeah. The difference is one RX bar is that's 190 calories or something, right? So it's, or, one glass of milk is the difference between what you were doing before and now. So it's very gradual, very slow. And in general, I think that's something I've also learned, that anytime you're trying to change your body in either direction, the time horizon to think through is 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. Which is
to really see noticeable changes.
Really hard to be patient,
Mm-hmm.
I get.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a discussion come up with a client who had one of those moments, stepped on the scale, saw a number that was not good, and compared it to a number in her life that was good. And working through that conversation, I wanted her to kind of sketch out what her dream state body is without a number being associated with it. And, tell me what that body does, how it looks, how it feels, and kind of imagine that. And then the next step in that exercise is for me to kind of chime in and say, well, what kind of habits does that body need? How are they actually able to perform? How do they have to eat? How do they have to sleep? How do they have to train? And how far away from we are that person after we decide that theoretical body is actually realistic, because you have to incorporate genetics as well. And so if that dream state exists and it's realistic, and we can imagine that the habits that person is living with, what are the habits that we do now that get us a little bit closer to being that person?
I like that a lot. If you focus on the habits and the performance, even if you've got that ideal state in mind, what's awesome about that is you can take an active step towards those behaviors that will change your performance, but it might not change your body the way you think, or it might not take it as far as you want.
Right.
And yet you can get into those habits and get to a point where you might realize, I actually don't want that body. And I think this is, going back to my comment about Brad Pitt, or whether it's now, The Rock or Thor, Chris Hemsworth, I think people have it in their head that that's like an optimal way to look. And yet getting that type of body takes a massive amount of drugs, usually, or at least some performance enhancing drugs.
Dehydration.
For a very limited period of time to be stage ready or camera ready.
Right.
And they are not feeling good or healthy in those moments, and making major personal sacrifices in order to get there.
Yeah.
And I love what you're saying there, that, if you can still use that, that ideal that you want to aim for, but describe it in ways that are habit-based or behavior-based. That's really, really powerful exercise. It reminds me of actually right before I started working with Jillian, I remember we had a conversation where I was like, I'm thinking about just going, I was at that 260 to 270 range. And I'm like, I'm either going to blow it out again, like just see how huge I can get and lift like the biggest weights.
Like 300, I think you said.
Yeah, I was like, maybe I can go to 300, and I want to hit these lifetime PRs, or I'm thinking about doing like a recomposition. And you kind of suggested that, like, well, imagine yourself at 300 and what does that feel like? And what kinds of things are you doing? What does that life look like? And then imagine yourself the other direction. And that totally changed it for me, because when I visualized who I would be or how I would feel at 300 pounds, which would be 15 pounds heavier than when I was at that 285 I mentioned.
Yeah.
I just imagined being so sweaty and eating all the time and
So much breathing,
spilling
heavy.
out of my clothes, and just not sleeping well, snoring again, like all this stuff that came along with it from a lifestyle and behavior standpoint that didn't want to do.
Yeah.
That exercise alone changed my outlook on what choices I wanted to make. I got to focus more on the lifestyle and like how I felt, which, circling all the way back to the beginning, like I think that's really, as subjective as that may be, I think that is a way better indicator of where things are at. And of course, medical disclaimer, there's all kinds of psychological factors at play here that we're not, educated or trained to be able to address. So obviously there are some, just saying to the world, just base it on how you feel, might not actually be the best for everybody involved. But,
Yeah.
Certainly from my experience, the times when my relationship with food is based more on feeling like I eat a well-balanced meal that has a variety of different types of whole food, and I notice that I feel better afterwards, and I'm not just eating to hit a certain, if it fits your macro number, where I'm eating just like tortillas and protein powder
Yeah.
all day, something ridiculous.
Yeah. That's not very fun. You're too good of a cook for that.
Such a better feedback mechanism to pay attention to how you feel,
Yeah. And it gives you a sense of responsibility. You have to take responsibility for your body. And the way that comes up for me is like, well, if I go to the mountains and we go to our favorite beer brewery like every day, and I'm not eating as many vegetables as I am usually eating, my body is going to look and feel a certain way. And I know what I did to get that. And if I am okay with those choices, then I get to enjoy those choices. And I get to be like, you know what? I had so much fun. I really enjoyed it.
Right.
It tasted good. The beer was cold and delicious, and it was right by the river. And I'm not going to feel bad about what I did to get to that state anymore. And so you kind of remove that shame and kind of embarrassment of like guilting yourself into going into a deficit. And you're just like, you know what? It was fun. Now I know what I need to do to feel different and to feel better.
Yeah.
And it really makes you less of a victim to your own choices. You get to decide like this, if I want to have this lifestyle, this is how I'm going to look and feel. And then you have the power to choose which one you want.
I like that. I think that's a good ending point right there. You have the power.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit more about actionable nutrition in the next episode. So come back next week. But Andrew, thanks for telling me your Milky Boy story and your terrible nickname that they gave you.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're having fun now in your body.
Childhood scars.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll be here next week. Thanks for listening. If you liked it, give us a review, share it with someone who you think would benefit from this episode, and we'll see you next week.
5 stars.
Yes, 5.
Bye-bye.